Here is part 2 of A Spell for Chameleon. If you missed the first part, you can head to my YouTube channel. I'll put the link in there and you can catch up and then come back and watch this one. So here you go, part 2. Enjoy. Bink could dodge around it and run the kid down, but he was sure to get caught several times by that re-manifesting wall and suffer more damage than he could do to the boy. It wasn't worth it. If only he had a talent of his own, such as Numbo's hot seat, he could make the Joker sorry regardless of the wall. But he didn't, and Chilk knew it. Everyone knew it. That was Bink's big problem. He was fair game for all the pranksters because he couldn't strike back. Not magically, and it was deemed crass to do it physically. Right now, he was quite ready to be crass, however. "Let's get out of here, Bink," Sabrina said. There was disgust in her voice, nominally directed at the intruders, but Bink suspected part of it applied to him. An impotent kind of rage began building up, one he had felt many times before and had never gotten used to. He had been balked from proposing to her by the lack of a talent, and he could not stay here for the same reason. Not here at Lookout Rock or here in Xanth, because he didn't fit. They walked back down the path. The Jokers, getting no further rise from their prey, went in search of other mischief. The landscape no longer seemed so lovely. Maybe he'd be better off away from here. Maybe he should take off now, not waiting to be officially exiled. If Sabrina really loved him, she'd come with him, even outside, into Mundania. No, he knew better than that. Sabrina loved him, but she loved Xanth too. She had such a sweet shape, such kissable lips, that she could find another man much more easily than she could adjust to the rigors of life among the unmagical. For that matter, he could find another girl more easily than what he faced. So probably, objectively, he'd be better off going alone. So why didn't his heart agree? They passed the brown stone where the chameleon had perched, and he shuddered. "Why don't you ask Justin?" Sabrina suggested as they approached the village. It was dusk, closing in faster here than up at Lookout Rock. The village lamps were coming on. Bink glanced across at the unique tree she indicated. There were many kinds of trees in Xanth, a number of them vital to the economy. Beer barrel trees were tapped for drink, and oil barrel trees for fuel, and Bink's own footwear came from a mature shoe tree just east of the village. But Justin tree was something special, a species never sprouted from seed. Its leaves were shaped like flat hands, and its trunk was the hue of tanned human flesh. This was scarcely surprising, since it had once been human. In an instant, that history flashed across Bink's mind, part of the dynamic folklore of Xanth. 20 years ago, there had been one of the greatest of the evil magicians, a young man named Trent. He had possessed the power of transformation, the ability to change any living thing into any other living thing instantly. Not satisfied with his status of magician, granted in recognition of the awesome strength of his magic, Trent had sought to use his power to preempt the throne of Xanth. His procedure had been simple and most direct. He transformed anyone who opposed him into something that could not oppose him. The worst threats he converted to fish on dry land, allowing them to flop until they died. The mere nuisances he changed to animals or plants. Thus, several intelligent animals owed their status to him. Though they were dragons, two-headed wolves, and land octopi, they retained the intelligence and perspective of their human origins. Trent was gone now, but his works remained, for there was no other transformer to change them back. Holographs, hot seats, and invisible walls were qualifying talents, but transformation was of a different order. Only once in a generation did such power manifest in an individual, and it seldom manifested twice in the same form. Justin had been one of Magician Trent's annoyances. No one remembered exactly what he had done, so Justin was a tree. No one had the ability to change him back into a man. Justin's own talent had been voice projection, not the parlor trick that was ventriloquism or the trivial talent of insane laughter, but genuine, comprehensible utterance at a distance without the use of vocal cords. He retained this talent as a tree, and he had a great deal of time for thought. so villagers often came to this tree for advice. Often it was good advice. Justin was no genius, but a tree had greater objectivity about human problems. It occurred to Bink that Justin might actually be better off as a tree than he had been as a man. He liked people, but it was said in his human form he had not been handsome. As a tree, he was quite stately and no threat to anyone. They veered to approach Justin. Suddenly, a voice spoke directly in front of them. "Do not approach, friends. Ruffians are lurking." Bink and Sabrina drew up short. "Is that you, Justin?" she asked. "Who is lurking?" But the tree could not hear as well as it could speak, and did not answer. Wood did not seem to make the best ears. Bink, angry, took a step toward it. "Justin is public scenery," he muttered. "Nobody has a right." "Please, Bink," Sabrina urged, pulling back on his arm. "We don't want any trouble." No, she never wanted any trouble. He would not go so far as to call this a fault in her, but at times it became annoyingly inconvenient. Bink himself never let trouble bar him from a matter of principle. Still, Sabrina was beautiful, and he had caused her trouble enough already tonight. He turned to accompany her away from the tree. "Hey, no fair!" a voice exclaimed. "They're going away." "Justin must have tattled," another cried. "Then let's chop down Justin!" Bink halted again. "They wouldn't," he said. "Of course they wouldn't," Sabrina agreed. "Justin is a village monument. Ignore them." But the voice of the tree came again, a bit misplaced in relation to Bink and Sabrina, evidence of poor concentration. "Bink, friends, please, fetch the king, quickly. These ruffians have an axe or something, and they've been eating loco berries." "An axe?" Sabrina exclaimed in sheer horror. "The king is out of town," Bunk muttered. "Anyway, he's senile. And he hasn't summoned more than a summer shower in years," Sabrina agreed. "Kids didn't dare make so much mischief when he had his full magic." "We certainly didn't," Bink said. "Remember the hurricane flanked by 6 tornadoes he summoned to pull down the last wiggle spawning? He was a real storm king then. There was the ringing sound of metal biting into wood. A scream of sheer agony erupted from the air. Bink and Sabrina jumped. "That's Justin," she said. "They're doing it." "No time for the king anyway," Bink said. He charged toward the tree. "Bink, you can't!" Sabrina cried after him. "You don't have any magic!" So the truth came out in this moment of crisis. She didn't really believe he had a talent. "I've got muscle, though," he yelled back. "You go for help." Justin screamed again as the blade struck a second time. It was an eerie wooden noise. There was laughter, the merry mirth of kids out on a lark, having no care at all what consequences their actions might have. Loco. This was mere insensitivity. Then Bink was there, and he was alone. Just when he was in the mood for a good fight, the malicious pranksters had scattered. He could guess their identities, but he didn't have to. "Jama, Zinc, and Popiter," Justin Tree said. "Oh, my foot!" Bink squatted to inspect the colt. Not colt, the cut. Colt was long gone. The white wood wound was clearly visible in contrast to the shoe-like bark of the base of the tree trunk. Driblets of red sap were forming, very much like blood. Not too serious for a tree this size, but surely extremely uncomfortable. "I'll get some compresses for that," Bink said. "There's some coral sponge in the forest near here. Yell if anyone bothers you while I'm gone." "I will," Justin said. "Hurry." Then, as an afterthought, "You're a great guy, Bink. Much better than some who have magic," Bink finished for him. "Thanks for trying to spare my feelings." Justin meant well, but sometimes spoke before he thought. It came from having a wooden brain. "It isn't fair that louts like Jamma are called citizens, while you—" "Thanks," Bink said gruffly, moving off. He agreed completely, but what was the use talking about it? He watched out for anyone lurking in the bushes, waiting to bother Justin when the tree was unprotected, but saw nobody. They were really gone. Jamma, Zinc, and Popiter, he thought darkly, the village troublemakers. Jamma's talent was the manifestation of a sword. That was what had chopped Justin's trunk. Anyone who could imagine that such vandalism was funny. Bink remembered one of his own bitter experiences with that bunch not so many years ago. Intoxicated by loco berries, the three had lurked in ambush along one of the paths beyond the village, just looking for mischief. Bink and a friend had walked into that trap and been backed up against the cloud of poison gas that was Poppader's magic talent, while Zinc made mirage holes near their feet, and Jama materialized flying swords for them to duck. Some sport. Bink's friend had used his magic to escape, animating a golem from a stick of wood that took his place. The golem had resembled him exactly, so it had fooled the pranksters. Bink had known the difference, of course, but he had covered for his friend. Unfortunately, though the golem was immune to poison gas, Bink was not. He had inhaled some of it and lost consciousness even as help arrived. His friend had brought Bink's mother and father. Bink had found himself holding his breath again as the poison cloud enveloped him. He saw his mother tugging at his father's arm, pointing Bink's way. Bianca's talent was replay. She could jump in time back 5 seconds in a small area. This was very limited, but deviously powerful magic, for it enabled her to correct a just-made mistake, such as Bink's breath of poison gas. Then his breath is whooshed out again, making Bianca's magic useless. She could keep replaying the scene indefinitely, but everything was replayed, including his breath. But Roland looked piercingly, and Bink had frozen. Roland's talent was the stun gaze. One special glance, and what he looked at was frozen in place, alive but immobile until released. In this manner, Bink had been prevented from breathing the gas a second time, until his rigid body had been carried out. As the stun abated, he had found himself in his mother's arms. "Oh, my baby," she cried, cradling his head against her bosom. "Did they hurt you?" Bink came to an abrupt stop by the bed of sponge, his face flushing even now with the keen embarrassment of the memory. Had she had to do that? Certainly she had saved him from an early death, but he'd been the laughingstock of the village for an interminable time thereafter. Everywhere he went, kids exclaimed, "My baby!" in falsetto and sniggered. He had his life at the expense of his pride. He knew he couldn't blame his parents, though. He blamed Jama and Zinc and Poppader. Bink had no magic, but perhaps for that reason, he was the huskiest boy in the village. He'd had to fight as long as he could remember. He wasn't especially well coordinated, but he had a lot of raw power. He had gone after Jama privately and demonstrated convincingly that the fist was swifter than the magic sword. Then Zinc, and finally Poppader. Bink had hurled him into his own gas cloud, forcing him to dissolve it very suddenly. Those three had not sniggered at Bink thereafter. In fact, they tended to avoid him, which is why they had scattered when he charged the tree. Together they could have overcome him, but they had been well conditioned by those separate encounters. Bink smiled, his embarrassment replaced by grim pleasure. Perhaps his manner of dealing with the situation had been immature, but there'd been a lot of satisfaction in it. Down underneath, he knew it had been his irritation at his mother that motivated him, displaced people like Jama, but he did not regret it. He did love his mother, after all. But, in the end, his only chance to redeem himself had been to find his own magic talent, a good, strong one like that of his father, Roland, so no one would dare tease him or laugh at him or baby him ever again, so that pure shame would not drive him from Xanth. And that had never happened. He was known contemptuously as the spellless wonder. He stooped to gather several good strong sponges. These would abate Justin Tree's discomfort, for that was their magic. They absorbed agony and spread a healing comfort. A number of plants and animals, he was not quite sure in which category the sponges fit, had similar properties. The advantage of the sponges was that they were immobile. Picking them would not kill them. They were tough. They had migrated from the water when the corals did, and now thrived on land. Probably their magic healing properties had been developed to facilitate their lives in the new medium. Or maybe before the migration, since coral was cutting stuff. Talents tended to run in schools, with one overlapping another. Thus many variants of each type of magic showed up in the plant and animal kingdoms. But among people, magic varied extremely wildly. It seemed that individual personality had more to do with it than heredity, though the strongest magic tended to turn up in particular family lines. as if strength of magic was hereditary, while type of magic was environmental. Yet, there were other factors. Okay, there's another 15 minutes for you. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next time.